Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm delighted to be here today with Umbrex member Jeremy Greenberg, who is going to talk to us about a tool his firm has built. It's called the AI-powered audience simulator by the Avenue Group. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Will, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, Jeremy, I understand this is not yet available to the general public. You're about to start a closed beta where listeners here, if you get excited about it, you can reach out to Jeremy to sign up. And you're going to walk me through the tool. I'm looking at it. The audience is not. So you can kind of give me a verbal description blow by blow as we go through a test of the tool. But give me kind of the overview of what it does.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So in essence, what this audience simulator does is it allows you to provide a set of custom instructions by saying, this is the type of audience I want to look at. These are the type of segments I'm interested in learning more about, just like you would do for regular research for interviews or for surveys. And then once you've defined the who, then you can ask them questions of the what. And then so you can ask them different types of questions, qualitative questions, quantitative questions. And then when you input that information, you run it, and within a few minutes, you get results. You get actual results from simulated respondents. And really what this is doing is it's mirroring the sentiment of collective segments and audiences, just like a ChatGPT or other LLMs do on a one-on-one basis. You see a lot of people using it for understanding what would a celebrity think of this situation? What does Steve Jobs think about the new iPhone? Or how can I talk to even dead relatives? People are doing that. And so there's an immense power in these LLMs, but they haven't been harnessed in this collective way that can mirror the distributions of the underlying population. And that's where we come in, and we allow you to do that through this tool.
Right. So we're basically doing market research. It's as if we're running a survey on humans, whether it's B2B or B2C, and allows us to, in some cases, substitute for a survey or potentially complement a survey. We could test some runs first using your tool before we go to the much more expensive trial in the field with human beings and get an initial sense of what sorts of results we might get. And so you'll have like a set of questions, and it's going to simulate asking it to, hundreds of people where you design the segments, and then you get the results, right? So am I understanding that correctly?
That's exactly right. And I would say, I have about 25 years of research experience. And so this is one of these, and I'm not particularly good at coming up with new ideas for products. I'll admit that. This one really came out of a pretty clear pain point. There's so many pain points around doing consumer or B2B or expert interview research, where you have to find the people, you have to convince them that you're not trying to sell them something so they'll participate. You have to incentivize them, and then you have to conduct the information and then synthesize it. So there's a lot of pain points, particularly when you're moving and you're using panels or other sources where sometimes the quality of participants is not amazing, and it can be extremely cumbersome. There's also situations where you want to simulate individuals where they're really, really hard to get to. Like, so we've talked with clients who work in healthcare, and they want to talk with patients who are in, stage 4 breast cancer. Well, you don't exactly set up a focus group for that, right? You want to be very sensitive about that. So to your point on complementing, maybe instead of talking to 20 people, now you can talk to 5 of them after you've done, some of simulations with this. And so what we're not saying is to use this instead of human research. We're really saying it to use it for 2 main reasons. One is to pre-test before you're conducting human research, which will help you prune topics, hone the language, uncover some surprises that you would normally see anyway when you do a soft launch, except you don't have to do the soft launch. You can iterate before you get it live. And the second way is you're unlocking these infeasible research mechanisms, things like, I want feedback on secret ideas. I have 10 really cool product ideas, but I don't want any consumers to know because I don't want the word getting out there. So now I'm going to simulate it and I'm going to ask people. Or I'm thinking of an M&A opportunity, but I don't know how the market's going to react. So I can simulate not the stock market per se, but I can simulate how our experts, how our employees, how do I think industry players are going to react when we do this. So if you think about it, there's a lot of opportunity here because really what we're taking is we're mirroring the sentiment of collective groups. And if you take it further, which we're not doing yet, but it's on our roadmap, you can think about things around using it for jury simulations, for complex scenario planning. You could even retroactively create longitudinal studies because you could place collective audiences in different parts of time throughout history. So there's a lot of really cool stuff here, but we think the coolest and most applicable use is really for research here because it's such a big pain point. And frankly, we're a research firm, so it made a lot of sense for us for that to fit. So I can jump you through. We can walk through an example here as well.
Let's jump into it. So I'm seeing a kind of an entry screen where it says number 1, create audience. And then number 2 is add traits to create segments. Number 3, view segment traits. So
sure.
walk us through a sample here.
Yeah. So, and I just want to say to the audience, we're in the process of updating our front end. So the flow is going to be a little bit different, but in essence, the first section is the who, right? So first we create our audience, which is your global population that you're interested in for the particular topic. So in the example we give in our video, it's Americans who drink Coca Cola. You could make it as specific or general as you want, but it's your overall population. The reason you want to set that is because afterwards, we're going to create subsegments within that, and all of the subsegments will have that audience criteria. So if you say Americans who drink Coca Cola, every segment is going to be an American who drink Coca Cola. If that makes sense. So
give us some other examples for maybe some B2B type surveys.
Sure.
Maybe,
so we did another
CFOs who are currently switching from, Salesforce to some other CRM system or.
Absolutely. So we did a demo for an international company that wanted to understand for its software and its accounting and financial related software, what are the other types of software that small businesses are using in these different regions that could help them with affiliate and partnership relationships. So what they wanted to understand is they said, basically, decision makers who decide what types of software to use at different small businesses, and they segmented them into different countries. They looked at Australia, New Zealand, UK, and the US in this example. And from that, they asked questions around what's the vendor ecosystem? What kinds of vendors do you use for communication tools? What do you use for your accounting tools? What do you use for taxes and so forth? And so that can give you pretty quickly, a visual of, okay, these are the different software companies that are being used by different subsegments within your audience. And then you can potentially take that and say, okay, this is a good first cut of, potential partners we could work with.
Amazing. Okay. So you create this audience, and that might be that's like the broader audience. And then maybe it's, executives responsible for procuring, uniforms, right?
Will, you make it sound so sexy. I love it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is sexy. I mean, it's cool stuff,
So why don't we put one in? Let's make it whatever you want. You want to do that? Executives?
Yeah, executives responsible for the sourcing and procurement of uniform rental.
Okay, so I'm typing that into the audience box.
All right.
As best I can recall it. for
uniform rental service.
Okay.
Yeah, this will be perfect.
Okay, so we've got executives responsible for the sourcing and procurement of uniform rental
services. Yeah, services. There we go.
Okay.
Save that.
And then do we want to have it just in the U.S.? Do we want it overall?
Yeah, in the U.S. Sure.
In the U.S. Okay. So then we click save.
Yeah.
So that's our audience. And now what we can do is we can create segments. And the way we create segments, and this is going to be a little bit different in our new iteration, but effectively you come up with different characteristics to define the each segment. So
yeah, I'd like to do it maybe by industry. So sure. I bet there's probably executives in the food service industry who, procure uniform
Right.
rental
So we
services.
don't need to repeat executive sourcing.
Oh,
We can just say like work in food industry.
oh, work in food industry. Perfect.
And then what we do is by the way, we can add more traits if you want. So for this
No,
segment,
yeah, for
or we
that
can
segment,
keep
that's
it
fine.
simple.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just make it like 20 people so we can do
All
it
right.
pretty quickly. So
So
we've just created a segment of people, and you can see now the review area here of within the audience, these are those who work in the food industry. And so now we'll do some other industries.
let's try the chemical industry.
All right. So we're adding a segment with one trait, which is work in chemical industry. We'll
Yep.
do 20 for that as well.
And let's do one more. Maybe how about janitorial services? They probably have uniforms, janitorial
They
services.
do. I've done a bunch of work there actually. Just going to call it, just to be consistent, janitorial services industry. And so now what we've done is we've created our three segments. And so for those who are listening, we have a review section, and it basically says, what are the different traits? What are the different elements that comprise each of these segments? And then we have a sample for each and the percentage made of the total. So we have our who. We have our who.
Right.
Now what we want to do is we want to ask our questions. And so as of now, we download the CSV and we add the questions. In the new version, you can just type them directly in.
All right.
But let's go ahead and do the previous one now. So basically here we can ask, any types of questions we want. We would recommend not asking questions about like politics or current events, just given the time horizon of the model. But we can ask a lot of questions about to this group.
Yeah, and in terms of so some of the questions might be some open-ended, like what provider do you currently use, and then might be what were your key buying criteria for
So I like
selecting?
starting broad and going a little deeper with research generally. One thing we may want to do is kind of double check our traits, right? So you could ask them something like, what company do you work for? What industry? Or something like that, where we can say, okay, does it actually match, right?
Oh, okay.
So we could start pretty broad like that. We could just say, what industry are you in? And presumably they'll answer correctly, but we'll find out. Now we know the industry. We've got questions. These are all executives responsible for sourcing, procurement of rental services, uniforms.
And we can even say like, what company do you work for? What is your title?
Sure.
We do that. Oh, exciting.
What company do you work for? What is your title?
Yeah.
We could ask things like how many years you've been in. We could ask that. How many years have you been in this industry?
All right.
Okay, so we've asked a little bit of background information. We could obviously ask, any demographic information we want, any psychographic, really any questions. But right now, these are all open-ended questions, right? So we could also add closed-ended questions. We could add quantitative questions. I like to do rating questions because I think you get a lot of value out of that. So one thing we could ask is something like, what maybe I would want to know is like, to what degree do they have a split wallet around their, of the uniforms? Like how many vendors are you working with might be an interesting question.
Okay.
And then we could actually turn that into a multiple choice question that's quantitative. So we could say, how many vendors do you have for, what do we call it? Uniform
rental services.
Uniform rental services. All right. And then we can say sort of like one. Well, we could test it and say 0. You could say 1, say 2 to 5, and let's say greater than 5. So then that'll get us some sort of distribution. We could see like, how much is the wallet fragmented perhaps.
Okay.
And then something maybe we could say is like, who is your primary vendor? And then let's have them rate them. So now we have the name, and we can say on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is very unhappy, let's say. And 5 is, oh, let's do satisfied for a little bit. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is very unsatisfied and 5 is very satisfied, how satisfied are you with this vendor? And then we can ask why. So we get some open ends. Anything else you want to throw in there?
And maybe just one more, maybe what was your key decision criteria when you selected this vendor?
I like that. Do you want to have just one or multiple?
Sure, you could have it multiple. Your top 3 or something.
Okay.
What are your top 3? And in normal real life, if we weren't just sort of typing this while we record, we would do things, and you can go ahead and type that. We would probably do things like, have you, gone through an RFP process within the past 2 years to select a vendor, and we'd screen people out and determine if they had gone through that process and so forth, to make sure that it wasn't just sort of a legacy thing, but they've actually looked at this themselves. But I think this is probably good enough for our purposes, Jeremy.
So we just added, what are your top 3 criteria for selecting your top vendor? Hopefully. Sure. Yeah. Sorry, your primary vendor.
Yeah. And actually, one more question I have, I'm just curious to see the results, would be like, what is your approximate annual spend on uniform rental services? I'd be kind of curious to see how your model creates those sorts of numbers. And I'll just describe for listeners, while you type that up, what Jeremy's doing is just a simple Excel file where he has just a list of these questions in column A. So that's all. That's what we've done so far, is just typed up this list of questions. Nothing too fancy. Like as you said, the next iteration you'll be able to type this directly into your browser-based tool. So
that's exactly right.
And then Jeremy here he's saving this to his laptop, and then I think he's gonna just upload it to the tool. So it's a pretty quick kind of save and then upload.
Yes, we've got our questions. And then so now what we're going to do is upload the file.
Okay.
And then we have a couple minutes where we wait. But you can see I've just selected the file with the questions we just did. I click run. And the way this works is I'm logged in. So it knows my email automatically. And so it's going to email me the results for me to take a look at. One of the things we're going to change in the future is you're going to be able to see everything on the page here. Sure. And you're going to see synthesis, and you're going to see the data in. It's interesting. When we started, I thought that people. This is an interesting learning for me. Like, I thought people would really want to dig into the data and work from the ground up and bottom up, because that's sort of what I normally do.
Sure, it's what I would want to do. Right.
What we found is people just want the answer. They want the so what pretty quickly, and so we're building in an element where, you can look at the data, you can download the data if you want, but the leading thing that people really want is give me the insight, right? In fact, that's something I think generally with research that you don't always see, right? You can get you can ask all the questions you want, but if you're not getting synthesis, if you're not getting the so what out of it, then you're making people work harder. So we're trying to create a tool that's easier, right? And frankly, a lot of those elements are not that hard to build in. The hardest part is making this thing work well and churn correctly.
So while we're waiting for the download, I'm curious, and that's so funny because definitely 2 personality types, right? Some people, just show me the answer. And someone who's a former consultant wants to be able to personally touch the data and mess around with it. I can do a pivot table on my own. Thank you very much. So tell me just a little bit how you built this tool. I'm curious, what was involved in building something like this? Yeah.
So first, just wanted to note the inspiration for this really came from some amazing research that's been done in academia. There's so much work that's being done to research LLMs, because even a company like OpenAI and Google, in these creators, they don't even know how their models are working, right? They don't fully understand the capability, the options, the experiences that their model could actually unleash. And so I was really interested in this space, generally speaking, and was listening to a podcast called Me, Myself, and AI in November with a professor from HBS named Professor Ayelet Israeli. And I probably listened to it 5 times in a row afterwards. And I've listened to it again a couple of days ago. And so what that talked about some initial research that they had done on ChatGPT 3.5, which is an older version. And they started to test some basic hypotheses around things like, does ChatGPT understand price sensitivity related to income? So if I make more money than someone who makes that, and someone makes less money, I ought to be on average less price sensitive because I have more money. And it turns out that's true. They also tested things like the value of a brand. Does ChatGPT understand that human consumers will value Colgate toothpaste over Acme toothpaste? And the answer is yes. So they did a bunch of these things that started to show indications that you could actually do things to simulate, to have the model simulate individuals. The next step is what we did is said, okay, well, how do you take that into a collective level? Because ChatGPT can be great at pretending like it's Will Bachman, but maybe I want to talk to a distribution of 100 types of people like Will Bachman, and I want to understand the long tail. I want to understand the distributions of different responses such that they actually mirror the reality of the world. Mm-hmm. Our results came in. We can go to it in a second. And so that's really what we've done here is, and when we've had the fortunate, really grateful for having an amazing advisor named Lennart Meinke, who's a member of Ethan Mollick's LLM research team at the Wharton School, arguably the top researcher in this area in the world, in the country, in academia. Wall Street Journal did a big piece on him. He's providing a lot of input to the U.S. government, has a best-selling book out. Would really recommend everyone follow Ethan Mollick on LinkedIn. He's got the latest and greatest research. And I think working with Lennart has really unleashed our ability to learn how to use this tool in ways that are a bit more advanced, a bit more creative than one would typically do. So we hired an engineer, we built it, and now we're in the process of really bulking up all the features and capabilities it has to offer.
So from a process or structural perspective, does your tool first go and generate, in our case, we had 3 segments, 20 people each. So does it first kind of go and create the 60 different personas and then interview each one of them and come up and get their answers and store it? Is that kind of the process, or does it create one at a time, or what's the sort of sequence of events that are happening inside its brain of your tool?
Yeah, so part of that answer is actually proprietary because depending on how you approach it, it can have a different impact on the results. But in essence, what you said is correct. What in essence is happening is it is creating, in our case, right, 60 different simulated respondents, 20 for each of these 3 segments. And each of the rows, right, if you think about rows of the respondents, is internally consistent.
Okay.
So if we had 100 questions, and in question 3, you asked, have you ever worked at a consulting firm? And they said no. And then question 98 says, have you worked at McKinsey? And they say yes. That would never happen. That does happen actually in human research because people are going fast, they're making mistakes, they don't care, whatever that is. So that's sort of one of the elements. The other element that's really critical is to make sure that the subsequent respondents are aware of how the previous respondents responded, such that they're not repeating them and that they're creating a distribution for that group of 20 that is representative of that actual segment. And that's where things get a bit creative in terms of like how we actually do that. But getting from the one to the many in a way that's actually mirroring the real populations is where a lot of this, a lot of the value comes in.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, let's take a look at the results that have come in.
Let's take a look at the results. Okay. So I've been emailed the results, and you can open up in Excel. We'll just open up here in Google Sheets because I'm maybe a convert, not really sure.
And I'm looking at a Google Sheet here. It just came in. It was CSV, and you open it as a Google Sheet. And I'll just read off. So I see column headings that are traits, and those are the 3 options. And then the segment response, the number within that segment, so 1 through 20. What industry are you in? Food industry was the first 20. What company do you work for? What is your title at that company? How many years have you been in the industry? How many vendors do you have for uniform rental? So all the questions that we have, it has their individual answers, right? Um, and so, okay, all right. So some of these are probably we might have needed to specify it a little bit more, right? So, we probably needed to teach the model because, like, we have a barista at Starbucks, and we probably should have made sure the model understood that it was an executive who is responsible for, sourcing, this particular category, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so walk us through what we're seeing here.
Yeah. So another thing you can do here is, and this is like a really good example of, sometimes the questions or even the segments may not be like as clearly defined. And so you could say, all right, well, I'm going to go back and change them, right? Let me make sure it's a decision maker. And that's a big thing with a lot of these procurement type projects, right? You want someone that's either a decision maker or aware of the decision making process, probably. But, just for fun, you can get a feel for this. So you've got here, we've got our 3 segments grouped into 20 respondents each.
So if we were redoing this one, because we just went quickly, if we had wanted it to be the person's role is the vice president of procurement or something like that, because we got some titles that were the host at the restaurant or delivery driver or a waitress, and we didn't get the kind of executive responsible for sourcing uniform rental services. So
yep. Yeah, so I think there are some ways we can play with it for sure. I think the other thing is I've actually done some projects in, I could say, at least for the janitorial services space, and sometimes the people who actually know a lot about those types of information are actually the people who aren't executives. So it's a bit of a tricky thing, but definitely hear you there.
All right.
So, and now we can see, for each.
It is giving us, I'm sorry to interrupt, it is giving us the primary vendor, and those do seem like names that I recognized. I see Aramark, I see Cintas, I see G&K Services, UniFirst. I mean, those sound like they could be uniform rental companies. I know Cintas is. So that seems, and then it has some interesting stuff under the why section about why they like them and so forth.
Yeah, I struggled through Aramark's food service in college. So yeah, they definitely have uniform. So we've got that so you can see the vendors for the food industry, and then you can see below that the vendors for the chemical industry, which look a bit different.
Right.
It's interesting. You can see some NAs here. Kind of interesting. And so I think they're indicating that they're not using these services, right? And then you can see, so that to our question, a point earlier on, like internal consistency, you can see it all NAs and go to $0 for those folks.
And for the chemical, we're seeing companies like Grainger, which seems like it makes sense for Grainger for the kind of services to manufacturing type firms. Cool. So, and then it gives a why. So you'd probably iterate and play with this, and it's not necessarily perfect and probably takes some iteration, but at least it gets you a sense of, who might the vendors be, the types of answers that you might get for people, and allows you to iterate the actual survey that you're going to put into the field and say, oh, if I ask it this way, I get a short, stubby little answer that's not the greatest. If I ask this different question, get some more insightful answers. So it lets you kind of test run your survey in a quick way.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are they answering in a way that I expected them? Okay, in this case, it looks like we're off a little bit on the executive. So let's go back and let's tweak that. Maybe we're missing vendors, right? And we want to actually probe on particular vendors. Another thing I'm seeing here is the annual spend seems pretty low here, right? So I think we probably want to push a bit on that. And like, is this the spend that for you? Is this for your entire company? We do say for your organization, but sometimes these types of questions need to be clarified for humans as well. I mean, sure. I see cases all the time where you'll see, very large numbers for a question like that and like ridiculously small numbers. The other thing I want to say, Will, is, we're constantly in the back end improving the model. And there are some questions that work definitely better than other questions. And part of the beta is to really understand, what are the types of questions that are most effective. And if we can feel, really, really comfortable about, different types of questions being as accurate as possible, then we really want to orient people to use those use cases as opposed to having a tool that can be anything for everybody. So feel pretty good about the ability to segment different people and replicate, what they, their perspectives. I think on the question type category and like exactly, there's like so many different question types that we're analyzing. Some have insanely high R squareds when you compare to human research. I'm talking, over 0.8 or 0.9 when you compare series data, and then some of them are lower. So, with the beta program coming up, we want to really work collaboratively with a number of different organizations across different areas, including consulting firms, research firms, researchers at different types of companies, whether it's healthcare or B2B or higher ed we've talked with. There's a lot of different areas here. And so there's more tire kicking we want to do to get people comfortable. The other thing I'll note is I don't see a future where this is not going to happen. And what I mean by that is the sort of panel industry and the way that they're structured and the frustration around them and the difficulty of getting surveys and finding people is so pronounced. And the power of these models is so strong and, accelerating, getting better and better. I don't see a world where if you fast forward 6 months, a year, whatever the right time frame is, this type of work, whether it's, our company or other companies or combination, someone's going to be doing this. And I think it's going to take a pretty big, it's going to be pretty impactful for doing research. What's been interesting in the demos is, and my guess is you did a demo like this too, is often people come with like their pet sort of like what's been on their mind idea, if that makes sense. And a lot of times when we talk with executives, they have like these like gut topics. They just want like a gut feel, right? And it's like, I just want to get a general sense if people think this is a silly idea or it's a good idea, or order of magnitude, which of these 5 segments do I think is going to be most interested? And then so you could run that really, no risk at all, like no sharing of proprietary PII. There's nothing like that going on here. And like you said, you get a directional indication. And from that, if you feel comfortable, then you can, prune your research, or you could skip your research depending on where you are. I think with everyone, including when we do the beta program, we really want people to get comfortable comparing it with their own data, because everyone's going to have a different, opinion in terms of how their segmentation schematic is set up, their sampling. They're going to know customers differently. And so we need to get that comparison, pretty early in the process. And we think that that's probably going to be part of the general, workflow for people that are onboarding anyway. You've got to get really comfortable where this is going to work and where it's not going to work as well, within your organization.
Great. So for listeners who are interested in signing up to be part of your beta, getting on the wait list, where would they go?
Yeah, so please email us at info@avgroup.com. It's info@ave, like avenue, group.com. And we'll get back to you. We do have, a good amount of interest, which is great. And, we will have a waiting list. We will keep the waiting list engaged as best we can. And really, we'd love to hear, ideas people have on like how they're going to use it. And, we're looking to get this commercially viable within the next few months, as a fast follow to the beta program. So yes, please reach out, info@avgroup.com if you're interested in being part of our program.
Fantastic. And Jeremy, I know that you have a kind of a demo video that I watched, and we will include a link to that in the show notes for people who want to see it with their own eyeballs. Thank you so much for joining today. It's very cool what you're building.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.